Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The French Dispatch, starring, and I'm going to just name the peoples I know: Benicio del Toro, Adrian Brody, Tilda Swinton, Leah Seydoux, Bob Balaban, Henry Winkler, Timothy Chalamet, Francis McDormand, Christoph Waltz, Cecile de France, and Saoirse Ronan, Edward Norton, Willem Dafoe, Jeffrey Wright, Matthew Emmerich, and Owen Wilson, directed by Wes Anderson. Now, if there's some names I didn't bring up that were in previous movies or starring for the first time, I am so sorry about you guys. I couldn't get anywhere further than that. So let's just go with the movie at this point. Now, I did watch this recently on home viewing, although I have seen it in theaters twice, but I just watched it on home viewing again, and I remember liking it the same way I did the first couple of times I saw it. Let's get into it, and you'll see what I mean. We open in a newspaper company called The French Dispatch as Arthur Howitzer Jr., played by Bill Murray, has a life story of how he became the person to read on The French Dispatch. And I'm really liking the setup in this movie, as I'm getting a Grand Budapest Hotel vibe from watching the setup of this movie, as Arthur comes off like a prick in this movie, and Bill Murray plays it very well, as this movie talks really fast, so you better pay close fucking attention or you'll get lost, which that's what I did on my first viewing. But on second viewing, I sort of had a hard time paying attention to it, as the movie has some stories from The French Dispatch to tell. We start with a brief story where Herb St. Cizirac, I don't know if I'm saying that right, please forgive me, played by Owen Wilson, riding a bicycle, telling the audience how the local French people live and their lives and how the place works and the population in France. And we go back to Arthur talking with Herb St. about what he can take out with just a genius idea from Wes Anderson. We go to a story of art as Moses Rosenthaler, played by Benicio del Toro, making a painting of Simone, played by Leah Seydoux, naked. And when they finish up, Simone puts on her uniform back on, and as she's the guard, whereas Moses is the prisoner at an asylum. And on my first viewing, I looked closely, like, is that Leah Seydoux? And I got a close look, and I said to myself, it is, as she's better here than she was in the last James Bond films. J.K.L. Berenstein, and I swear to God it makes me think of J.K. Rowling, but played by Tilda Swinton, explains the lecture of Simone naked painting. And we move on to Julian Cadazio, played by Adrian Brody, wanting to buy the Simone naked painting, as we go back and forth between those two scenes, which kind of drove me crazy, but that's how Wes Anderson takes time to explain how the story goes, with Berenson explaining the story, and Moses, the painter, as the Benicio del Toro character, is insane, as he wants to stay in prison, and he says in a speech he gives the other inmates, and the character in the story works tremendously. Moses says I love you to Simone, but Simone doesn't love him back, but she doesn't want to date prisoners in her own jail where she works at. And I felt the chemistry between Benicio del Toro and Leah Seydoux, as the movie goes back and forth between color and black and white, as this is a great looking movie with stellar performances by the cast, and Wes Anderson has a fantastic vision to shoot the movie, and the score by Alexandre Desplat does memorable work, from Grand Budapest Hotel to The Shape of Water to even this movie, as I like the score in this movie because it's pleasant while the scenes work great. Moses wants to die as Simone comes in, and he tells her it's too hard to get back to painting, as Simone briefly shocks Moses, but he's luckily alive, and she talks him into painting again, which works as he gets back to it. And Berenson goes out of the line with the lecture unprofessionally, but gets back to being professional rather quickly, which was pretty funny. Moses meets with Julian and demands him to finish the painting in 2 weeks, as Moses wants to show it in a year, as Julian has invited some guests to a party in a gallery to show Moses' painting without Julian ever seeing the painting, and he, along with the guests, seen a ton of paintings by Moses, as their paintings on the wall, And Julian flips out as he thinks he and his uncle wasted money on him, as Julian threatens Moses, and Moses chases Julian as he insults him, which was pretty funny. But the next day, he likes the paintings, and in my opinion, the paintings are beautiful, and a mob of prisoners come in and attack the presentation room. And I don't get the narration of the ending of that story, but I do like the story as it works very well. We get to story 2 as we get to Lucinda Crimmins, played by Frances McDormand, narrating as she watches the chess game with Zeffirelli, I don't know if I'm saying that right, played by Timothée Chalamet, winning in 2 movies in a row where Timothée Chalamet impressed me after this and Dune, which I'll get to next week. And the next scene, Lucinda is at Zeffirelli's parents' place as she goes to the bathroom to clean her eyes, and she reads what he wrote and thinks it needs corrections. And she takes him to her place to type a different way for it to make sense, as Zeffirelli's story is either doing Lucinda or finding a girl with a girl named Juliet, who sometimes playing chess is, as it reminds me of a gender version of either Romeo and Juliet or West Side Story, while his brother Rich comes home from the war, and we see a play about what happened to him, as there was one of his fellow soldiers named Marceau who wants to protest and jumps out of the window committing suicide. But the ending in this story was all over the place. But it made me the least interesting story told in this whole movie. The subtitles sometimes were a little crooked, as there were speaking French, which felt weird. But I mean, it is called The French Dispatch, so I'm not going to blame the movie for that. And in my opinion, isn't really the best choice, but because it could confuse the shit out of people in general. The mayor hears the chess game between a Frenchman and Zeffirelli, while Juliet argues with Zeffirelli about how he writes and learns Lucinda wrote some of it, as Julia always disagrees with everything Zeffirelli says, while the mayor is waiting for a move on the chess game, or else he puts rubber bullets and some gas to knock someone out, in which he does, while Zeffirelli and Juliet ride off together, as Zeffirelli dies at a young age while working at an electric skyscraper. And I do like Timothée Chalamet and Frances McDormand, but the story unfortunately felt very familiar, like I've seen this from out of Shakespeare or a musical. But in my opinion, this is the least interesting story in this whole movie, as I wasn't the biggest fan of it. We go back to Arthur and we see Lucinda there for a brief moment, and we move on to story 3 with Roebuck Wright, played by Jeffrey Wright, as he's being interviewed with the talk show host played by Liev Schreiber. And we follow Roebuck to different rooms as he sees a little prison called the Chicken Coop, as it holds Albert the Abacus, played by Willem Dafoe, for a brief moment, as he goes to the commissaire, I don't know if I'm saying that right, please forgive me, played by Matthew Almeric, for dinner, as he has a son who will get captured by some criminals led by the Chauffeur, played by Edward Norton, as he threatens to kill the boy. And this may be the best story in the movie, in my opinion, because it's a mystery, which is unlike Wes Anderson, but I like the way he pulls it off. The bad guys take the boy in a room where no one can find him, as he's tied up, but we get a brief interruption with the story of how Arthur found Roebuck and gets him out of prison, and he was arrested for love, which I didn't get, but it doesn't matter because the movie speaks fast, and I liked it. And like I said before, you've got to pay close fucking attention, which admittedly I didn't on my second viewing because I thought I had it from the first viewing. But anyways, back to the third story. The boy is tied up right next to a junkie who's played by Saoirse Ronan, as she can't talk to him but sings him a lullaby as the boy sends a Morse code saying he's hungry, and the commissaire prepares food for the boy. And so far, I'm having the best time with this story. We get a second interruption from the talk show host about why Roebuck writes about food and explains it with a briefly answer without knowing what to say, and we go back to the story with a violent shootout as they negotiate to bring a chef up to the lair for the boy and to get something to eat as he cooks it and presents them to them as well as the boy as they eat some poison, not prison, poison, and are knocked out and have an animated sequence which was violent but brilliantly animated, that wasn't claymated nor stop motion, as they chase him with a hero in the front, and they crash and go around the block in France, and the hero comes back and fights the bad guy while getting killed by the bad guy. But the good news is while all this, the boy escapes and the story ends. I did like the animation during the chase, and the story was great in its own, as I wanted to see Wes Anderson make a dark comedy about the story. And we move on to Arthur as he published his last stories on the French Dispatch as the next day comes, and he dies, sadly. And everyone is sad about it, which was funny because Arthur has a rule that is no crying in his office nor in his presence, and have a piece of cake and draw him to remember. And they read an obituary about Arthur with the people in the office saying something as the credits roll to some art that I've been getting emails from this movie as this climax saves the best story for last. And I admire that, to be honest. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 8.0 out of 10. I really liked the Jeffrey Wright and Benicio del Toro stories, but the story with Timothée Chalamet was fine, but not the greatest, as I've seen that story before. The cinematography going from color to black and white is the right choice for the movie, as most of the time it was making good choices, but there were a few times when it didn't make the best choices, but I still really liked the movie at the end of the day. The movie is well acted, directed, and shot, as I would put this in my Blu-ray collection. And Wes Anderson does a tremendous job pulling off his vision, as it was a fun time to like all of his movies. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for the French Dispatch, and until Wes Anderson makes another movie, it's time to get quirky.